There is a sexual disease that almost every narcissist develops by the end of their life. And no, it's not about performance, attraction, or desire. It's far worse than that, because this condition doesn't affect the body first, it infects the mind. And by the time it shows up, there's no applause left to distract from it. If this is resonating, pause for a second. Like the video, subscribe, and stay here. Understanding this protects you from mistaking intensity for intimacy. When we say the sexual disease is not physical but psychological and relational, it's important to understand what that really means beneath the surface. A narcissist's relationship with sex is never rooted in mutual experience or shared emotional presence. From early on, sex becomes a tool for regulation. It regulates their self-esteem, their sense of worth, and their illusion of power. Desire from another person acts like proof of existence. It says, "I matter, I'm wanted, I'm superior." That framing alone removes sex from the realm of connection and places it squarely into the realm of self-maintenance. Because of this, intimacy never develops properly. Emotional intimacy requires curiosity about another person, empathy, and the capacity to tolerate vulnerability. A narcissist experiences vulnerability as danger. So instead of learning how to bond, they learn how to perform. They learn how to seduce, impress, provoke, or dominate. Sex becomes something they extract from others rather than something they share with them. Over time, this creates a split. Physical closeness exists, but emotional presence does not. As life progresses, this psychological wiring starts to fail them. Sexual attention becomes less reliable, admiration becomes conditional, and novelty becomes harder to secure. The narcissist is left with a drive that no longer delivers relief. They may still want sex intensely, but the experience no longer fills the internal void it once masked. That's the disease. A craving without nourishment, a hunger that cannot be satisfied because the missing ingredient was never sex to begin with. Relationally, this shows up as emotional barrenness. Partners feel used, unseen, or replaceable. Sex feels empty, transactional, or strangely disconnected. Even when a partner is physically present, there is no sense of being met. No shared emotional field. The narcissist may blame aging, partners, or circumstances, but the reality is internal. The psychological structure required for meaningful sexual connection was never built. What remains is a pattern of repetition without depth, stimulation without bonding, closeness without safety, a system that was designed to avoid intimacy now trapped in its absence. Narcissists rely on sexual validation because it functions as an external regulator for their fragile sense of self. Unlike intimacy, which requires mutual emotional presence, sexual validation offers something immediate and one-sided: confirmation. Being desired reassures them that they are still powerful, still relevant, still superior. It quiets underlying shame without requiring self-reflection. Sex becomes a mirror rather than a meeting place. What matters is not how the other person feels, but how the narcissist feels about being wanted. This reliance develops because narcissistic identity is built on performance, not authenticity. They learn early that admiration and desirability can substitute for emotional security. Instead of forming a stable internal sense of worth, they outsource it. Sexual attention becomes proof of value. The intensity of pursuit, the hunger in someone else's eyes, the willingness to be chosen or chased all serve as evidence that they matter. Intimacy, on the other hand, threatens exposure. It asks for emotional reciprocity, accountability, and empathy, which destabilize the narcissist's carefully maintained self-image. Because of this, sexual encounters are often charged with urgency but lack depth. The narcissist may appear passionate, confident, or highly sexual, but the motivation is regulation, not connection. Once validation is secured, interest often fades. The partner's inner world remains largely irrelevant. What matters is the effect they provide. This dynamic leaves partners confused, sensing closeness without safety, intensity without bonding, attention without attunement. Over time, the reliance on validation becomes more compulsive. As novelty decreases and admiration becomes harder to extract, the narcissist may escalate behaviors, seeking stronger reactions or more frequent reassurance. Sex becomes less about pleasure and more about stabilizing self-esteem. When validation is delayed or withdrawn, they may experience irritability, emptiness, or panic rather than longing or grief. That reaction reveals the core truth. Intimacy was never the goal. The tragedy of this pattern is that intimacy could have offered something sustaining. Validation is fleeting. It wears off quickly and demands renewal. Intimacy, by contrast, grows through shared vulnerability and emotional safety. But because intimacy was never developed, the narcissist remains dependent on a resource that diminishes with time. What remains is a persistent need to be desired without the capacity to feel deeply connected. A cycle of seeking confirmation without the tools to experience closeness, leaving desire active but attachment undeveloped. For a narcissist, desire is never experienced as a shared emotional signal. It is treated as currency. It has value only insofar as it can be collected, exchanged, or displayed. Sexual desire becomes a measure of status and leverage. If someone wants them, it means they are winning. If someone pursues them, it confirms dominance. In this way, desire is stripped of its relational meaning and converted into proof of superiority. It is not about mutual wanting, but about being wanted. Because desire is used as currency, it must be visible, intense, and repeatable. Subtle affection, steady attachment, or quiet closeness do not register as valuable. What matters is pursuit, urgency, and the emotional charge of being chosen. This is why narcissists often devalue stable partners over time. Once desire becomes predictable, it loses its exchange value. There is no longer a thrill of conquest or a sense of advantage. The partner's desire no longer inflates the narcissist's self-image, so it is discounted. This transactional view shapes how sex is initiated and maintained. Seduction becomes strategic. Attention is given selectively, often withdrawn to increase perceived worth. Desire is manipulated to create imbalance, because imbalance produces power. The narcissist may alternate between intense sexual attention and emotional distance, not because of confusion, but because scarcity increases currency value. What looks like passion is often economic control in emotional form. Over time, this system creates emptiness. Currency only has meaning in circulation. Once desire can no longer be reliably extracted or used to maintain dominance, it loses its psychological function. Aging, long-term relationships, or reduced access to admiration expose the flaw in the system. Desire without leverage feels meaningless. Sex without control feels flat. The narcissist may still crave desire intensely, but it no longer produces the internal payoff it once did. What remains is a distorted relationship to sexuality. Desire is present, but stripped of warmth. Sexual encounters may continue, but they feel hollow and disconnected. The relational richness that comes from shared longing never develops. By treating desire as something to collect rather than something to share, the narcissist ultimately deprives themselves of the very experience that gives sexuality depth. They are left fluent in pursuit but unfamiliar with closeness, skilled in extraction but incapable of mutual exchange. As the narcissist ages, the strategies that once sustained sexual control begin to fail, and this is where the underlying emptiness becomes unavoidable. For much of their life, sexual power was maintained through visibility, novelty, and access to attention. Youth, desirability, and social positioning made it easier to command interest and create imbalance. Aging interferes with all three. Attention becomes less automatic. Competition increases. The body no longer guarantees leverage. What was once effortless now requires force, denial, or fantasy. This exposure is deeply destabilizing because sexual control was never about pleasure alone. It was about hierarchy. Being the one desired, pursued, or envied created a sense of dominance that compensated for a fragile inner core. As aging reduces that dominance, the narcissist does not grieve or adapt. They panic. Instead of shifting toward emotional intimacy, which requires humility and mutuality, they double down on old tactics that no longer work. This creates humiliation, not growth. The loss of sexual control also removes distraction. Earlier in life, conquest and validation kept deeper feelings at bay. Aging slows the pace. Gaps appear. Silence stretches longer. In those gaps, the narcissist is forced to confront what was never built, an internal sense of worth and a capacity for emotional closeness. Without sexual control to prop up identity, the emptiness becomes loud. What they feel is not longing for connection, but fear of irrelevance. This is why aging often intensifies bitterness, envy, and entitlement rather than wisdom. Sexuality becomes a reminder of loss instead of a source of joy. Some narcissists attempt to reclaim control through inappropriate pursuits, exaggerated sexual storytelling, or fixation on youth. Others retreat into resentment, blaming partners or society for no longer responding as before. What they cannot tolerate is the realization that sexual control was never intimacy, and that its disappearance reveals how little connection was actually present. In healthy development, aging can deepen sexuality by shifting focus from performance to presence. For the narcissist, that shift is nearly impossible. Presence requires emotional availability, and availability exposes vulnerability. So instead of evolving, sexuality becomes rigid, nostalgic, or desperate. The emptiness that was always there is no longer masked by attention or pursuit. Aging doesn't create the problem, it reveals it in full light, stripping away illusion and leaving behind the stark reality of control without connection. When sexual attention begins to fade, the narcissist does not experience it as a normal life transition, but as a psychological emergency. Attention was never optional for them, it was stabilizing. It kept their inner world organized and their self-image intact. So when admiration decreases, the reaction is not sadness or reflection, but panic. The nervous system goes into threat mode. They feel exposed, diminished, and suddenly unseen, and that feeling is intolerable. Rather than turning inward and asking what they might need to change or heal, the narcissist turns outward in desperation. They look for someone to blame, someone to provoke, or someone to extract reassurance from. This can show up as increased sexual pursuit, exaggerated flirtation, inappropriate advances, or compulsive comparison with others. The goal is not pleasure, but relief. attention, even negative attention, momentarily soothes the fear of invisibility. This panic also explains why narcissists often react with rage or contempt when they feel sexually disregarded. Rejection is not processed as disappointment, it is experienced as annihilation. Being unwanted activates deep shame, so they immediately defend against it by devaluing the source. The partner becomes cold, boring, ungrateful, or defective. Anyone who no longer desires them must be flawed, because acknowledging the loss would mean confronting their own fragility. What never occurs in this moment is insight. Panic leaves no room for curiosity. Reflection requires tolerating discomfort, and the narcissist's entire psychological structure was built to avoid that. Instead of asking why connection is missing, they obsess over how to regain control. They chase youth, novelty, or admiration as if it were a life raft. This keeps them moving, but never healing. Over time, this pattern becomes exhausting. The more attention they need, the less satisfying it becomes. Each hit wears off faster. The panic returns sooner. Relationships grow increasingly unstable because they are driven by urgency rather than care. Partners feel the pressure to perform desire rather than express it freely. This accelerates emotional distance, which further reduces genuine interest, creating a vicious cycle. In the end, the panic reveals the core wound. Attention was never a supplement to intimacy, it was a substitute for it. When it disappears, there is nothing underneath to fall back on. The narcissist is left chasing reassurance in a world that no longer mirrors them, unable to slow down, unable to self-soothe, and unable to recognize that what they needed was never attention, but connection. As the narcissist continues to lose access to genuine admiration, sex gradually shifts from something that once felt empowering into something mechanical and hollow. What used to create a rush of superiority now feels flat, repetitive, and strangely disconnected. The body may still respond, desire may still exist, but the emotional resonance is gone. Sex becomes an act performed out of habit, entitlement, or anxiety, rather than mutual wanting. The narcissist is chasing a memory of feeling powerful, not an experience of closeness. This mechanical quality comes from the absence of emotional presence. Because the narcissist never learned to be emotionally available, sex was never integrated with attachment. It existed in a separate compartment, isolated from tenderness, curiosity, or care. When novelty and validation decline, there is nothing left to animate the experience. The partner becomes a prop rather than a participant. Touch happens, but it does not land. There is contact without attunement, stimulation without warmth. Transactional patterns become more obvious at this stage. Sex may be used to secure loyalty, avoid abandonment, or extract reassurance. It becomes something owed rather than shared. The narcissist may keep score, feel entitled to access, or interpret sex as proof that they are still valued. When that proof is not immediately delivered, resentment builds. The act itself loses pleasure because pleasure was never the primary goal. Control was. Partners often describe feeling strangely alone during sex. They may sense that the narcissist is present physically but absent emotionally. There is little interest in mutual experience, little responsiveness to emotional cues, and little capacity to slow down or connect. The narcissist may appear focused on outcome rather than exchange, on validation rather than intimacy. This leaves partners feeling used, unseen, or interchangeable. Over time, even the narcissist becomes aware that something is missing, though they rarely name it accurately. They may complain of boredom, dissatisfaction, or a sense that sex no longer hits the way it used to. Instead of recognizing the emotional deficit, they often blame partners, circumstances, or aging. What they cannot tolerate is the idea that sex feels empty because it was never built on emotional connection in the first place. This is the quiet consequence of avoiding vulnerability for a lifetime. Sexuality, stripped of emotional depth, becomes repetitive and joyless. The body goes through the motions, but the experience lacks meaning. What remains is activity without fulfillment, intimacy without closeness, desire without nourishment, a pattern that continues long after the illusion of power has faded. As the narcissist's sexual control and validation continue to erode, shame begins to replace entitlement, and this shift is profoundly destabilizing. Earlier in life, entitlement acted as armor. It allowed them to believe they deserved access, attention, admiration, and desire simply for existing. That belief protected them from confronting insecurity. But when desire is no longer freely offered, entitlement collapses, and what surfaces underneath is not humility, but shame. Deep, corrosive shame that had been carefully avoided for decades. This shame is not processed in a healthy way. Instead of being recognized and integrated, it is experienced as humiliation. The narcissist feels exposed, diminished, and painfully aware of their dependence on others for validation. Sexual rejection or indifference becomes a mirror reflecting inadequacy rather than power. Where they once assumed desire would be available, they now fear it must be earned, and that fear is unbearable. It activates the same internal wound they have spent their lives running from. Because shame is intolerable, the narcissist attempts to outrun it. They may cling to exaggerated fantasies of sexual prowess, inflate past conquests, or obsess over how they are perceived. Some become bitter and contemptuous, mocking intimacy or dismissing sexuality altogether as if it never mattered. Others grow defensive, interpreting neutral behavior as rejection and responding with withdrawal or hostility. These reactions are not signs of acceptance, but of a frantic attempt to regain psychological balance. In relationships, this shame creates emotional volatility. Sexual interactions become tense rather than playful, pressured rather than mutual. The narcissist may oscillate between craving reassurance and resenting the need for it. They want desire to erase shame, yet they feel ashamed for wanting it so badly. This internal contradiction leads to emotional rigidity and further distance from partners, who may sense the insecurity but feel blamed for